Hey, welcome to another exciting, yes, I know, invigorating is really the word I should use, lecture video on word processing, advanced word skills, and yes, columns. So last time we were taking a look at tables, now we're going to take a look at columns, not those Roman things that hold up ceilings and that. We're going to take a look at Microsoft Word columns. So make sure you get out your notes, you follow along and the STORM philosophy for note-taking. Sit back and enjoy. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? Well, we are going to cover exactly what are columns. We're going to identify why we use columns and not tables. We're going to take a look at a column example, and then we're going to create some columns and modify them. So columns are what you see when you see your text in vertical strips. Now it can be 2, 3, 4, 5, however many columns you wish in your document. The normal default view is when your text is in one column. That spans from the left side of your page to the right side. As soon as you see two strips of text, you have now entered columns into your document. So it arranges your text in such a way that makes it a little bit more readable, makes it a little more simple to follow along, and typically people like this when they are reading. So when I say your text is a little more simple, a little more readable for those who are reading your document, I mean that the reader's eye doesn't need to travel so far across the page before returning to the next line of text. That's one of the benefits of columns, is that it makes it a little more easy and quicker to read the text. At least it feels that way. You can fit a little more text on the page as well if you lay it out so that the lines don't stretch the full width of the page, and therefore you make your document feel a little bit more approachable. I know you students sometimes look at a piece of text and say, whoa, that is a lot of reading. There's no way I'm going to do that. Sometimes when we add columns to this piece of text, you guys will read it because you don't feel so overwhelmed by the amount of text. And what we often find columns in are, well, newsletters or newspapers. We see columns all the time in these pieces of text documents. We see them in manuals, we see them in brochures, and we see them in anything else that makes sense. Columns are not to be used all the time, but in certain documents and in certain fashions they should be used. And so when it makes sense, use columns. And so newspapers are definitely the most common use of columns. Here's an example for you, right? When you open up a newspaper, you'll see them in columns. Even newspapers that are online or through an app still use the column approach to text. Why? Because again, it attracts more readers to the article. It attracts more people to picking up the paper and buying it. So there's a little bit of marketing going on in here, but it makes it a little bit more simple to follow along. So when we're ready to create our columns in our document, we're going to use one of two ways. The first and easy way is to simply select the column icon. Now this little icon at the top of your toolbar there looks like two strips of lines. These two strips of lines indicates that this is columns and that you will then be shown the column properties window. In the column properties window, you can select how many columns you wish to include in your document. You can make the left side or the right side column a little bit skinnier than the other one. You can change the width of each of the columns and make them however you want. And once you've done all that and entered your data, hit OK, and there you have it. You have your columns. So the other way that you can insert columns is to do so after you've already written your text. And when you do this, you can select your text or position your cursor at where you want the beginning of the columns to happen, to occur in your document. Once you've done that, you're going to select Format, drop-down menu, then select Columns. Under Presets, select the number of columns. And again, you can choose 1, 2, 3, or however many you want. Under Width and Spacing, you can adjust the columns if necessary. At the Apply To section, this is where you want to click on this point forward, and therefore the text after your cursor will then become columns. And once you've done that, hit OK, and there you have it. You got columns. So once you have your columns in your document, you can move between your columns, and therefore to move between the column, you're going to select Insert in the drop-down menus, Break, and then Column Break. At the end of the last column, to return to a full width document, you can go back to Format, Columns, and then select 1, and apply this to the point forward. Will then apply the rest of your text to single columns, and therefore you can move between having columns in your document and then regular single column text, which is the default view. So this brings us to the end of the lecture video. Think about this for a second. How can columns help you to convey information better? Why would you use columns and not tables? Columns are not so easy to manipulate, so why use them? There are purposes and there are reasons for it, so think of that now. All right, so make sure your notes are in order. Make sure you have followed the store and philosophy. You have your discussion questions. And that's it. That's all. That's everything. We'll see you tomorrow.